Okay, this is part two, chapter 5, 5.4, cell transport. Now, there will be a lot of questions coming from this particular section here. It's important that you really, really listen to this pretty good so you can have a complete understanding because there are a lot of transport proteins with different modes as to how substances can actually cross a membrane, which is called your plasma membrane, which is around the cell of both plants and animal cells. It regulates what can come in and out of the cell. Also, it's selectively permeable. Some substances can pass freely, some have to be transported across, and of course, some just cannot go across at all. They're prohibited. So you can enter by passive transport. Okay. This is another name for passive transport, guys, is simple diffusion. Substances move from an area of a higher concentration to an area of lower concentration, and there is no additional energy that's required here. So no ATP is needed over here because the molecules are moving down their concentration gradient from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. In your textbooks, okay, if I open it, let's see. There's probably an example in your textbook. It is, okay. I love this example. Active transport, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Substances they're opposite. They're going to go from low to high. So when you go from low to high, guys, you're going to need some additional energy, which is in the form of ATP. So let me give you a really, really good example of passive transport and active transport. Passive transport is you simply um, going to the top of a hill and riding your bicycle down the hill. You don't need any energy required. You don't have to pedal down the hill because gravity is going to be pulling you down the hill, so there's no energy. Active, on the other hand, is the opposite. When you're trying to go up a hill or an incline on your bicycle, it can be pretty hard. It's going to take a lot of energy for that in the form of ATP because you're going from the bottom of the hill, which is the low concentration, to the very top, which is high concentration. You also have bulk transport, which, of course, when you're trying to take a lot of things across that selectively permeable membrane, you're going to have additional energy required here as well. Passive transport, uh, another name for it is simple diffusion. No energy is required. Okay. Molecules go down their concentration gradient until dynamic equilibrium is reached. No energy over here. Um, Facilitated diffusion, others use transport proteins specific to molecules. So, for example, with facilitated diffusion, which is a type of passive transport, um, water, for example, is going to go from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, but water can cross more quickly because it has what you call aquaporins. Aquaporins are transport proteins that will actually allow molecules to cross the selectively permeable membrane more quickly and more effectively. Okay, so on page 88 of your textbook, they have passive transport, no energy required. Facilitated diffusion, figure 5.11. Figure 5.10 is an example of simple diffusion. Okay, remember, simple diffusion does not require energy. So here, if you look at, um, let's look at figure 5.10. Let's see. Well, okay, this is an example of simple diffusion, which is also called passive transport. If you look at the first picture, you dropped some dye into the water. So they're highly concentrated on the left side, okay? But the dye is going to start dissolving. And of course, the molecules are going to start moving because they're going to start colliding against each other. So when that dye, if you look at the second picture, you can see that the dye molecules are moving. So they're going from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, which means they're moving from the left side to where? The right side. Okay? So they're going from high to what? Low. Okay? Um, so water is also moving from an area of high to low concentration. So what you're going to see in letter C, you're going to see an equal distribution of both the dye and the water molecules. Okay? So they're going to be equally distributed, which is called dynamic equilibrium, the term that we use in biology, because the water, the dye has stopped moving, the water molecules have stopped moving, and that fishbowl, as you can see, is completely purple now. That's when you have dynamic equilibrium. Okay? Moving on. This right here, facilitated diffusion, I think is, I'm not sure if this is on your test or not, but facilitated diffusion, guys, requires some type of transport, some type of protein in order to go across the membrane. As stated earlier, um, you're going to have the assistance of a channel protein. If you look at figure 5.11, which is right here, you have your solutes, which could be anything that can dissolve in water. It could be sugar, of course, it could be dye, of course, it could be sodium chloride or salt, okay? And water is going to be your solvent, okay? So over here, you're going to have to, in order for that solute, which is a large molecule, to cross, it's going to have to go through that carrier protein, okay? So it's going to go from an area of high concentration, you have 4 on the outside, but you don't have any on the inside, which means it's highly concentrated on the outside. So it's going to go from high to low. Once it hits that protein, which is that orange, you can see the shape of the protein is going to change a little bit. And of course, it's going to, if you look at the third picture, it's going to widen as the solute keeps flowing through it in order to get back into the inside of your cell. Um, Now, water can diffuse across the membrane because of its size. It's polar, so in order to move water across it, you're going to have to say, like I told you before, an aquaporin, which of course is a type of protein, and water can cross a little bit more quickly when you have those aquaporins. Okay, so glucose, which is a sugar, amino acids. Those are the ones that have to go through by facilitated diffusion, which means they're going to need that channel protein or the carrier protein that you see here or in your textbook on page 89. Okay. Osmosis, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Okay. Osmosis is the movement of water. Remember this definition. You may want to write it down. Is the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane. Okay, the movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane, and it's going to go from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Okay, so let's look here. Okay, on figure 512, page page 90. Okay, they have an example. This is a thistle tube here that you see. They have one on the right side and they have one on the left side. Okay. Now, you see your semi-permeable membrane, which is in red. Each thistle tube has a selectively or semi-permeable membrane. Okay. Um, The beaker contains only a 5% solution. Covered at the broad end by a similar contains a 10% salt solution. Okay, so if you look at the one to your left, it contains a 10% salt solution. Okay, but it has more water in the beaker. The inside of your tube, okay, to simplify this, forget the book, okay, here you have more water and you have less of, let's say, sodium chloride or salt. Inside of your thistle tube, you have less water, but you're going to have more what? Sodium. Water is going to go from the beaker inside of the tube, which is why it's going from an area of high concentration to an area of what? Low concentration. Water is what moves, guys, when it comes to osmosis. Water moves across the membrane. Nothing else will, okay? So if we look at letter C over here, now you can see that you have more water where in the thistle tube because it moved from an area of high concentration. It was filled up over here. Now you have less water in your beaker because it moved from high to what? To low. So it went across this selectively or semi-permeable membrane into your what? Your thistle tube. That's what happened. Osmosis in animal and plant cells, isotonic environment, okay? Isotonic now. Isotonic, hypertonic, and hypotonic. Those are all examples of forms of osmosis. Now, I'm going to go back to osmosis because I want to give you an example of osmosis. Okay, let's look at some examples in us of osmosis. Okay, kidneys. Dialysis, people go and get treated for dialysis. They have to get hooked up to a dialysis. It's called hemodialysis. They hook up to it in order to remove um, toxins and things out of the blood. Okay, so what happens is a really good example would be of osmosis is our kidneys. Our kidneys, of course, is going to reabsorb more water. Okay, because so we won't lose a lot of it in our urine. So the water is going to go from a high concentration to a low concentration, which means water is highly concentrated in our urine, but in order for us not to lose too much of it, there's less in our kidneys, so it's going to be reabsorbed in our kidneys in order to reduce the amount of water that we're going to lose. That's an example of osmosis. Another example of osmosis would be when it pertains to a semi-permeable membrane. When you place strawberries and sugar, okay, salting meat, that beef jerky is an example of osmosis. Um, when you eat popcorn and it makes your lips really, really dry, that's an example of osmosis because it's removing water from your lips, okay, and it's going in with the popcorn. And when you place vegetables such as lettuce or celery sticks or what have you, they have gone limp and you place it in water and it firms back up or plumps back up again, that's an example of osmosis. So all of those has to deal with a selectively permeable membrane, putting vegetables in water, eating popcorn, and your lips becoming dry. The beef jerky, such as or salting meat, which is a preservative, and placing fruit in sugar, of course, becomes a little bit syrupy. So that right there is, now let's look at, I don't want to, okay, I'm going to stop here, but I'm going to start, this is going to be a part 3, which is going to be the last part, isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic. I want to talk about all 3 of those together. So I've talked about osmosis, I've talked about simple diffusion over here, and we know simple diffusion is also called passive transport. It does not require energy. Of course, with simple diffusion, um, active transport, on the other hand, it does require energy in the form of ATP. Um, the one thing about simple diffusion, which of course is facilitated diffusion, smaller molecules can cross the membrane much faster than the larger ones. So gases such as carbon dioxide and CO, carbon dioxide and oxygen can move freely across the cell membrane by simple diffusion. Others, glucose, red blood cells, or blood, starch, things of that sort, they have to be carried or transported across. All right.